Coming up on this Thursday edition of Newsline at noon, the Korea-ASEAN summit kicks off in Korea's southern port city of Busan. The two sides are seeking to bolster their economic, political and diplomatic partnerships. South Korea's unification minister says Seoul and Washington's North Korea policy should focus on dialogue and cooperation to encourage the regime to change its ways. Plus, the Bank of Korea takes a wait-and-see approach and leaves its key interest rate unchanged at 2% for the second straight month, amid concerns about mounting household debt. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
It's noon Thursday, December 11th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Eoh Jin-joo.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broome, and we start with the opening of the Korea-ASEAN Commemorative Summit down in the nation's southern port city of Busan.
The summit officially opened a little over an hour ago with the Korea-ASEAN CEO Summit. For the latest, let's connect to our Hwang Seung-hee, who's at the venue in Busan. Seung-hee, fill us in.
Jin-joo, in her opening remarks, President Park Geun-hye made 3 proposals to boost economic relations between Korea and ASEAN. Now, the first is to create conditions for small and medium-sized firms to help them take part in global markets more easily. Now, President Park called the CEO Summit the perfect place for such discussion, as representatives from both the conglomerates and the SMEs were present. Now, the second is that she proposed diversifying economic cooperation between Korea and ASEAN into the service sector. Now, currently, their bilateral economic cooperation is limited to the energy and manufacturing sectors. Lastly, President Park called for further liberalization of the Korea-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement to open up more business opportunities. She noted that the efficiency rate of the Korea-ASEAN deal is only half of Korea's FTAs with other countries and urged for additional negotiations to improve the existing pacts. Guys?
And Seung-hee, what's on President Park's agenda for the rest of the day?
Well, Mark, President Park has been holding relay bilateral talks with 6 ASEAN leaders today. In the afternoon, she is scheduled to meet with leaders from Laos, Thailand, Singapore, and the Philippines. Now, with the Singaporean leader, President Park is expected to discuss ways to boost their bilateral ties in time for the 40th anniversary of their diplomatic ties next year. Following the bilateral meetings, President Park and the 10 visiting leaders will take part in a Korean cultural experience program and head to a welcoming dinner. The actual multilateral summit, which is divided into 2 sessions, will be held tomorrow. Now, Seoul's Foreign Ministry has noted that this is the most important diplomatic event of the year since it's the first multilateral summit in South Korea under President Park Geun-hye's administration. Guys?
It definitely seems that the president has a busy schedule ahead of her today.
Yes, thank you very much, Seung-hee, for your report, and do keep us updated throughout the day.
So President Park is set to hold separate summit talks with leaders of 6 ASEAN nations later this Thursday. And yesterday she met with prime ministers of Malaysia and Vietnam.
Yeah, that's right. And it was on Wednesday that the leaders of Korea and Vietnam announced the conclusion of their free trade agreement. And this deal comes after almost 2.5 years of negotiations. Chae Yu-san reports.
The concluding of Korea's free trade agreement with Vietnam may not seem like a big deal, considering the 7-year-old Korea-ASEAN FTA, but it's expected to help Korean small and mid-sized firms increase their exports to the Southeast Asian nation. Vietnam will remove tariffs on 200 additional products from Korea, including auto parts and cosmetics, many of which are manufactured by SMEs. Hanoi has also agreed to simplify its rules of origin and customs clearance, allowing textile and garments made in the inter-Korean Kaesang Industrial Complex to benefit from the simplified process. Seoul will open its market for nearly 500 additional Vietnamese goods, while excluding sensitive agricultural products such as rice, fresh garlic, and ginger. Korean companies specializing in tires and cotton anticipate boosting price competitiveness against their Japanese rivals in Vietnam. Compared to Tokyo's FTA with Hanoi, Korea has secured liberalization of more goods entering Vietnam, 2 percentage points higher in terms of import value. Considering Vietnam is Korea's #1 investment destination in Southeast Asia, the two sides have also bolstered protective measures for their respective investors.
Although the FTA with Vietnam will have a relatively limited effect on the domestic economy, it's expected to help Korea in joining regional trade networks such as the China-led FTAAP. It's also expected to speed up negotiations for two-way deals with other ASEAN members to increase Korean businesses' usage of the trade pact. Choi Yu-sun, Arirang News, Busan.
Now, this week's summit won't be all work and no play because it's not just the leaders of the 10 ASEAN member countries who are in Korea this week for a commemorative summit. Representative landmarks of ASEAN nations have also made a visit and are on display. Park Ji-won reports.
These lighted installation art pieces are called the Jewels of ASEAN, with each representing a landmark in each of the 10 ASEAN member countries. From the magnificent Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddin Mosque in Brunei to the famous Buddhist site of Sheragan Pagoda in Myanmar, the replicas are set up at Gwanghwamun Square, facing Korea's landmark Gyeongbokgung Palace. They symbolize the rich cultures and values of the ASEAN countries.
We are the traveler from Thailand and we are happy to see our landmark from Thailand. Is Wat Arun. It's a representative temple in Thailand, very popular in Thailand.
The exhibition was organized to celebrate the beginning of the two-day ASEAN-Korea summit that starts Thursday in the southeastern port city of Busan.
Each embassy of the respective ASEAN countries designated their representative landmark. They symbolize each member country's cultural heritage, their history, and their future. We hope the project facilitates a deeper understanding of ASEAN countries among the Korean public.
During the exhibition period, a tourism booth will provide visitors information on popular tourist destinations in ASEAN member countries. Fun events like quiz competitions are in store as well. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
And moving on, there are no easy fixes to the problems presented by North Korea, but South Korea's unification minister currently visiting the United States says Seoul and Washington should take a fresh approach to denuclearize the North. Shin Se-min reports.
Speaking at a forum on Korean unification in the U.S. Capitol on Wednesday, Unification Minister Ryu Gil-jae said Seoul and Washington needed to work more closely together to engage with North Korea.
To make the pressure more effective, dialogues and cooperation are also necessary. Our two countries should therefore strengthen our coordination for engagement as well.
U.S. Assistant Secretary of State agreed and said the allies needed to make it clear to Pyongyang that its pursuit of nuclear weapons leads to a dead end.
North Korea can never achieve the security and the prosperity that it desires while also pursuing nuclear weapons.
Minister Ryu said South Korea and the U.S. needed to come up with creative and diverse approaches to resolve the North Korean nuclear issue, and that it was important to make sure the North knows the benefits of cooperating with the outside world. He said that would ultimately open up more options for North Korea, boosting the quality of life for the North Korean people and demonstrating the regime was serious about improving its human rights problems. Most importantly, Ryu asked for international support, including from the U.S., for Seoul's drive for a peaceful unification, as it will provide growth momentum for the global economy at large. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, North Korean defectors have been sharing their painful experiences with American officials as the United States marks Human Rights Day on Wednesday with an event that gave them the floor. Speaking at the U.S. State Department, 24-year-old Joseph Kim and 21-year-old Park Yeon-mi recounted their lives in the North and shared stories of their escape. Both managed to get out of the North during their teenage years, fleeing famine and the severe lack of freedom. They urged the U.S. to help North Korea and its people have a better future and call on China to stop repatriating North Korean defectors back to the North. U.S. Special Envoy for North Korean human rights issues Robert King and Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights and Labor Tom Malinowski were among the officials that attended the event. A renowned nuclear scientist says North Korea could be in possession of around 20 nuclear bombs in just over 1 year's time. Siegfried Hecker, who is in Seoul for a Korea-US forum, told a group of South Korean lawmakers on Wednesday that Pyongyang is presumed to have the capability to produce some 4 nuclear bombs a year. He added that North Korea could conduct several rounds of detonation tests to miniaturize nuclear warheads. In April, Hecker was reported to have said the North had around 10 nuclear bombs.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on NEWSLINE at Noon with Mark Broome and Eoh Jin-joo.
I'm Eoh Jin-joo.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about
Korea Central Bank is keeping its key rate steady at 2% for now, but as expectations mount of a rate cut early next year, so are concerns about the impact that could have on household debt, which has seen record growth in recent months. Hwang Jie reports.
The Bank of Korea has decided to stand pat on its key interest rate, allowing more time to gauge the impact of 2 previous rate cuts in the second half of this year. The central bank held the key rate unchanged at 2% in December, following its monthly monetary policy meeting on Thursday. The central bank lowered the rate in August and October each by 0.25 percentage point. The rate cuts, which came in line with government efforts to boost the ailing domestic economy, left the country's base rate at an historic low, not seen since the height of the global financial crisis in 2009. Still, market expectations are growing of an additional rate cut early next year. They're being driven by recent monetary easing in neighboring countries like China and Japan, along with weak economic sentiment at home despite aggressive government stimulus measures. Low inflation also leaves room for more rate cuts. But lowering the key rate would stoke concerns about snowballing household debt that already stands at roughly $950 billion. The government's deregulation drive in the housing sector and a lower key interest rate worked in tandem to boost housing loans. Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan also emphasizes the importance of structural reforms to pull the economy out of its low-growth rut, as top central banker Lee Ju-yeol says the current 2% rate is sufficient to support the country's recovery momentum. Hwang Ji, Arirang News.
The State Rent Institute has lowered its growth estimate for Korea for this year and next year. The Korea Development Institute says it expects the Korean economy to grow 3.4% in 2014 and 3.5% in 2015. Both revised forecasts are 0.3 percentage points lower than the Institute's previous estimates in the first half of the year. The Institute said it made its decision in light of weak domestic consumption, slowing investment, and uncertainties overseas. In particular, the KDI cited slowing export growth to China and the EU. And crude oil prices fell to fresh 5-year lows on Wednesday after OPEC cut its oil demand projection for next year. The forecast is the lowest in more than a decade and far below current output. Kim Min-ji has the details.
OPEC has slashed its estimates for oil demand for 2015. It has lowered its projection to 28.9 million barrels a day, which is down about 300,000 from its previous forecast. The figure is the lowest in 12 years and down about 1 million barrels from what it's currently producing each day. With the cartel's official production target set at 30 million barrels a day, more oil will be produced than consumed next year. The downward revision reflects the upward adjustment of non-APEC and U.S. shale supplies. OPEC says global oil demand is forecast to increase by 1.1 million barrels a day next year, but this will be offset by the estimated growth of 1.36 million in non-OPEC supply. Following the news, global oil prices tumbled to fresh 5-year lows. West Texas Intermediate oil finished 4.5% down at just under $61 per barrel on Wednesday on the New York Mercantile Exchange. This is the lowest level since July 2009. The benchmark Brent crude fell nearly 4% to $64.24. Crude oil prices have slumped by around 40% since June, and experts say it could fall further next year. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now, the mad rush to scoop up JL Industries shares ahead of its highly anticipated IPO is about to come to an end. The bidding ends today for private investors looking to cash in big. But, as our Song Ji-son reports, the biggest winners stand to be the heirs to the Samsung throne.
What is currently a 40-to-1 competition to buy a single share could swell in size by the end of the day. The race is on to own shares of JL Industries, the de facto holding firm of Samsung Group, which will be listed next Thursday. Some $6 billion have been deposited in bids so far for the 5.7 million shares that are available for the third largest IPO ever in the country, is made even more attractive due to the listing price, set at just $48 per share. But the market forecasts that the figure will easily surpass $100 soon after trading begins on the main bourse.
When you invest in and bid for a share seeking profit, you want the share price to jump to double its IPO price. I'm hoping that will happen in this case since Samsung's a big and stable company.
The company has a diverse portfolio, and there is internal demand from Samsung's subsidiaries. These factors have investors bullish about its mid- and long-term profit outlook.
But the biggest beneficiaries will not be the individual investors. The three heirs of Samsung Group acquired a 40% stake for just $8 million in 1996. The entertainment and catering arm of Samsung then acquired the fashion and textile sectors of JL Industries last year and changed its name to JL Industries this year. The heirs are estimated to have evaded billions of dollars in inheritance taxes and stand to gain some $5 billion in cash if JL shares hit $100. Samsung's IPOs and restructuring measures this year are aimed at helping the three heirs gain better control over the conglomerate, especially after Chairman Lee Gun-hee's heart attack in May. Song Ji-son, Arirang News.
Now, not too big, but not too small. Next year is expected to be a breakthrough year for phone tablets, or as they're more commonly known, phablets. Market researcher Strabase says gadgets between 5 inches and 5.7 inches in size will lead the trend, with smaller smartphones and larger PC tablets kind of on the way out. They say these mid-size phablets have become very popular because the larger screens are more convenient for multimedia purposes. You can watch videos easily on them, but they are still relatively easy just to carry around in your pocket. The global market for smaller smartphones is showing signs of a slowdown, actually. Market researcher Statista expects the rise in the number of compact phones released in 2014 to finish around 28%. From a year earlier. That's down from 40% in 2013. Now, are you on Instagram? Myself personally, I'm not, but a whole lot of people are. And the photo sharing app is now even bigger than Twitter. Instagram says 300 million people use this app every month, with around 360,000 new users signing up every single day. That's more than Twitter, which had 284 million active users as of October. Instagram, which was bought out by Facebook in 2012 for what looks like a bargain now, $1 billion US, says 70% of its users come from outside the US, and on average, users share 70 million photos per day. You can see some of the photos shared there. With its growth, Instagram says it will work on verifying accounts more carefully, especially those of celebrities and brands, and start weeding out spam. Well, it's that time in the newscast where we take a whirl around the world with our global headlines. For that, we check in with Eunice Kim, who's standing by at the news center for us.
Eunice, let's begin in the Middle East, where Palestinians are mourning the death of a prominent leader. He died after he and other activists were confronted by Israeli officers near the West Bank. What more can you tell us?
Well, Jin-joo, one Palestinian remembered Ziad Abu Ain on Twitter as the Palestinian Gandhi, remembering the minister-level official as a courageous, non-violent leader who stood up to Israeli military occupation. The 55-year-old and other activists, among them an Israeli human rights group, were on their way to plant olive trees in an act of protest against Jewish settlements on Wednesday. That's when they were met by some 30 Israeli officers and border police who fired tear gas and sound grenades at the group. Video captured Ain being pushed and apparently strangled, then looking faint as he fell to the ground. He was pronounced dead on his way to a hospital, and while an autopsy is being carried out, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas expressed shock and called Ain a martyr. He also vowed a proper response. Bailiffs in Hong Kong have announced the deadline has passed for pro-democracy demonstrators to clear, and authorities have begun to dismantle barricades at the main protest site. Ahead of the 9 a.m. deadline on this Thursday, thousands were still on the streets in the remaining two sites at Causeway Bay and Admiralty. That's where the main site and government headquarters are located. Some were seen packing up to leave, others taking down artwork or holding up banners that read, "We'll be back." Their sit-ins in place for the past 11 weeks have impacted the financial center as demonstrators push the city's leadership to challenge Beijing's hand in its politics, starting with the coming chief executive polls in 2017. Now, a quick trip to outer space. After a year-long trek across Mars, NASA says its Curiosity rover has obtained new evidence that strongly suggests the red planet may have had a more moderate climate. Kim Ji-yeon reports on Mars's ancient lakes.
NASA says the red planet may have maintained a climate millions of years ago that could have formed lakes. Observations by the space agency's Curiosity rover in August show deposits of sediments around Mount Sharp, a large 5 kilometers high peak in Gale crater that resembled deltas formed at river mouths on Earth. Ashin Vasavada, Curiosity deputy project scientist, says this finding could challenge previous arguments that wet conditions were short-lived or only underground on Mars.
Over a span of perhaps millions of years, water flowed from the northern rim of Gale crater towards the center, bringing sediment that slowly formed the lower layers of Mount Sharp.
NASA says this revelation, however, does not prove the existence of past life forms on the planet. Researchers have yet to identify the conditions that could have produced long periods of warm atmosphere to maintain stable water on the surface. But one thing's for sure, the Curiosity project has taken a giant leap forward in uncovering some of the red planet's best-kept mysteries. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Time magazine has given this year's honor of Person of the Year to the men and women on the front lines of the Ebola outbreak. You may not recognize most of the 5 individuals on the 5 separate covers, but they represent the healthcare workers fighting every day on the ground. Among those pictured were Liberia's Dr. Jerry Brown and American missionary Dr. Kent Brantley. In its tribute, the magazine applauded their bravery and commitment. It said they were willing to stand and fight the epidemic so the rest of the world can sleep at night and so the global health system could catch up with a solution to end the war. To date, Ebola has killed more than 6,300 people in West Africa's Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea, with the death rate currently at about 70%.
Well, we started off with relatively mild temperatures just below the freezing point here in Seoul, but you may have noticed it's not warming up very much. Despite being under sunny skies, strong gusty winds and cold front from the north are bringing a chill to the air, and the daytime high will not rise that much, remaining at 1 here in Seoul, but there will be a sharp drop in temperatures tomorrow morning here in the capital, starting off at -6, so be sure to dress warmer. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. Now, the afternoon temperature in Seoul will hike up to 1, while Daegu and Gwangju peak at 8 and 6 respectively. And as for the other regions, Jeju Island will be getting up to 10, while Daejeon and Dokdo sees highs of 4 and 7 later in the afternoon. Now, the cold snap returns tomorrow morning, and afternoon snow is in the forecast for here in the capital, and it seems like we're going to have a major cold snap through the weekend, and even colder conditions are in store next week. That's all from me today. Let's send it back to Mark and Jin-joo in the studio.
Well, thank you very much for the weather there, Jian. And this is where we say goodbye on this Thursday afternoon.
Join Mark and I on the same time tomorrow on Friday. Thank you for watching.